there YouTube. We are back with our weekly deck check series. This week I'm going to be doing it on my own just because TJ is recovering from illness, so we're giving him enough time to rest, recuperate, and come back fresher than ever for 2.5. For those of you who are watching this on Wednesday, as members, we really do thank you. We couldn't be here without your support, and the fact that you're giving back to us really does mean a lot, and we are forever grateful for it. For those of you who are watching this on Friday as it goes live to the general public, please do consider becoming a member, or at least look at instructions on how to do so down in the video description below. Right now, members get access to some of our content a little bit earlier. Those pieces include our deck profiles that go live every week along with this series. In the future, we're going to be utilizing our membership a little bit more as we start streaming more and interacting more with you guys. So be on the lookout for sort of updates in that department, but like I said, if you could check it out, we would be forever grateful. Hit that like and subscribe button as well if you haven't already. Any support does mean a whole lot to us. For those of you who are new to the channel or checking us out for the first time, the idea of deck check is to really bring forth and highlight lists that are doing well and topping their respective events, but also kind of break down the archetype and talk about what makes these decks good and how you can kind of utilize this information and craft your own decks, right? It's going to be really interesting too as we start to see unification come out with BT-21, which, mind you, is just around the corner. How this series is going to grow and develop, because I do think it's going to be really cool to see how we incorporate deck building and how that differs from lists that are going on in JP. So I really do think it's going to be a really interesting series to keep an eye on, as we're going to see that sort of compare and contrast aspect come into play when we're starting to build decks, when we're all on the same page, right? So definitely excited to see where this series takes us. But for now, we're going to be highlighting a lot of the JP lists that are giving us an idea of what these decks in BT-20 can do for us. So strap in, stay tuned. We've got a few decks to highlight for you guys, and really exciting ones in that too. So enough yapping from me. Let's hop right into the first list here, which is piloted by Molly. This was Gigaseadramon, was in Korea at a Tamer battle. Looks like a total of 24 players, so I mean a pretty good showing there. And Gigaseadramon is in an interesting spot. I think for those of you who may or may not agree, with sort of the downtick on Mirage and its prevalence in the meta right now, I think Gigaseadramon has really proven itself to be sort of the premier blue deck, at least the premier blue archetype that we're seeing a lot of moving forward. It can do a lot of things. This card here in the promo Seadramon, if it'll load, is really, really good for the deck, right? The on-play when digivolving effect is okay, but the inheritable for Rush really adds to the aggression for this deck. In a deck that likes to play stuff out via effect, this promo Seadramon really gives you that added aggression to keep swinging and utilizing either jamming or that pseudo protection that is just so good at keeping your bodies out on board and being sort of that mid-range, high aggression archetype that Fish is really well known for. When you pair that with cards like Mega Seadramon that allow things to restand, the Gigaseadramon, which is a really, really good card that we're seeing come the release of BT-20, gives it check +1, gives it reboot, as well as gives it blocker, which is really, really good. And then you also get that sort of control aspect with the de-digivolve keyword. So I think a really, really good card. I don't believe you wideboard as much as your traditional Fish decks do, but I do think you can essentially build up a big stack that is very strong, has a lot of control aspects to it, but then also spit out sort of your lower, like level 4, level 3 bodies that potentially can gain rush with the promo Seadramon. And what you're doing is basically just kind of like hitting with your smaller bodies and then doing your big damage with your big body, right? So all of that accumulates to a lot of damage in multiple hits, which is really what this deck likes to do. You do see the addition of Omnimon X Antibody, even though it's out of one of. I think the fact that you do run X Antibody in this deck along with the Gigaseadramon makes it sort of like a logical choice, right? If you have the opportunity to run Omni X, which is a really, really good card, you might as well do so. And the fact that you don't miss out on like the X Antibody targets because your level 6 already utilizes it is even more icing on the cake. And I think it's just really, really good, right? The rest of the deck is pretty standard. Like I said, your level 3s are pretty straightforward. This is a very, very common spread for fish outside of the Dracomon. I'm wondering if that... Actually, that makes sense because of the inheritable, right? When one of your Digimon with Dramon and its name becomes suspended, this Digimon gains plus 1 KDP. So not bad. You get to search something with Dramon as well, which again is a generically good blue searcher for this archetype. Your level 4s again are pretty straightforward, as well as your level 5s. Otherwise, I think this is a pretty solid core for Gigaseadramon moving forward. So definitely be on the lookout for it. So congrats to you, Molly. And moving on to our next deck, we've got Kirk, who piloted Royal Knights back in the Philippines. This was also at a Taomon battle, got first place. So Royal Knights is actually a deck that I'm super excited to mess around with. I wouldn't call myself like an OG Royal Knights player. I'll be honest with you guys. I actually like hated playing this deck. Back when it first came out, I despised playing against this deck. But the more I play it, the more I actually like have come to enjoy it. And I think again, similar to last week's Royal Knights profile that we had on Deck Check, very more so like the traditional build. So I won't spend too much time going over each card, but obviously this new Omecamon is one of the key pieces to the deck. You know, it has blocker, on play. If you have one or fewer security cards, this Digimon digivolves into Omni X Antibody in the hand, ignoring the Digivolution requirements and without paying the cost. Really, really good defensive option and sort of like a last-ditch line of defense for Royal Knights. You know, it was a deck that struggled a lot against high aggression, high tempo decks. This now says, beat me, right? Like this gives it an extra lifeline, and that lifeline in turn becomes a very strong aggression piece as well when it swings over to your turn. Another really nice part of this card is the breeding or inheritable effect, which is when your security stack is removed from, you can suspend this Digimon, you can play one Omecamon from this Digivolution cards, this Digimon being Drazzle, without paying the cost. So again, if you need a blocker out on board, just go ahead and put it out there and just give yourself another body. If it survives the turn, it gets another check. So a lot of flexibility you can get with Omecamon. And I think really, really, really key card, really key piece. Definitely run out of 4 of, along with the Omnimon X Antibody. Most lists that I've seen are running 4 of the new Omni X. This one is only running 3, which is, I mean, it's a choice, but I mean, 3 and 2 is still a pretty solid split. And then you're also running the new Cool Boy, which is really, really good too. Being able to give yourself draw power and consistency along with memory, making your Royal Knights plays a lot more efficient, is very, very huge for this deck. And then opponent's turn, once per turn, when any of your Digimon will leave the battle area, you can play one Omecamon from your hand without paying the cost, which again is just huge because like your big win con now is actually like getting Omecamon out as soon as possible, getting it under your sources. The fact that you know, Cool Boy synergizes with Royal Knights where Drazzle will keep tucking them in, right? So I mean, I guess that's during your turn, so it's not as big of a deal, but during your opponent's turn, right, like if they choose to remove it, you can just go ahead, play out an Omecamon, have it ready to go for next turn, right? So it just helps with your game plan and just makes your sort of win con that much more faster to achieve. Once you string out multiple Cool Boys, like you can be playing stuff for so cheap that it's disgusting. So definitely a huge card. Last Guardian is really nice for extra search, as well as just helping your Omnimon stay on the board. So I think it's a pretty solid option. The inheritable is really good. Being able to play it on a Omecamon or Cool Boy from hand or trash is super clutch. I think if anything, the inheritable is what really makes this card so good in this deck. And then you kind of have your typical mishmash of Royal Knights here, right? You've got the new Oryukin Ace. You've got the Justmon GX Ace. The Justmon X Antibody actually is a very interesting option to me. I didn't really think about this in my initial testing, but it actually makes sense, right? You know, your turn, all of your Digimon with Sistermon in their names or Royal Knight trait, which you're doing in this deck, gain piercing and can attack your opponent's unsuspended Digimon. So, for example, right, if you use Purge and you utilize either like Just X or, you know, other decks could be running like Genku, for example, right? If you're able to purge and do, for example, just Mount X Antibody, or and then get multiple bodies out on board, you can rush Just X in and of itself, right? If you just play it out, just the Just X off of Purge, it does get Rush. There's no on play you ignore. It's a your turn effect. You can just go ahead and swing at a body and pierce for a check and call it a day, right? So that extra aggression that you see with Royal Knights, which can be helpful. I think this added aggression is a very common theme actually in Royal Knights in the JP format. I don't have a list of it here, but I've seen a lot of decks in JP actually do something where they kind of scrap the sort of band of Royal Knights and they kind of focus on Rush Gallant, Gallant X, and options like, for example, Fire Rocket, which we see here. I've seen Lightning Joust as well, where the idea really is to get your Rush Gallant out, go into a Gallant X, be able to like trash security, restand, load that bad boy up with like multiple Lightning Jousts or multiple Fire Rockets, and then be able to do like 3 or 4 checks right out the gate and like OTK your opponent, right? Now, you may not have the gas to go for like game that turn, but if you can like whittle your opponent down to like 1 or 0 security in a turn, that's sort of the idea of it. And it makes it so that you don't have to rely on sort of this end Omni to win the game, or like Omni X, for example, to win the game. You just sort of aggro your way to victory with the Gallantmon package. So it's an interesting idea. I think here in North America and like the English side of things, we probably will be seeing more of like the traditional Royal Knights, in my opinion. I think JP tends to, in their best of one format, try to go like as quickly as possible, right? But it'll be interesting to see where this all plays out for sure. But yeah, I mean, that's the Royal Knights build. I'm definitely excited to play it, and definitely look out for a deck profile down the road. All right, so the next deck here that we have is Examon, piloted by Nasti Uduk. This was in Indonesia at a Tamer battle, got first place, so congrats again. Examon, I think, is an interesting spot. I think it's one of those decks that, can really pop off, and with the new top end, I can see where it can go crazy really fast. I feel like it's one of those decks that, go to 0 to 100 very quickly, but there's really like no in between. Like there's no like, well, let me settle at like the level 4 or the level 5. It's really like, if you're gonna start ping-ponging, expect them to like almost get into Exa right away and be like, I'm here. Whereas if they're bricked, they probably won't be doing a whole lot per se, right? I do think the new pieces add a little bit more consistency, a little bit more viability into Examon compared to where it was in EX3. We really haven't had a whole lot of support for it since. This new Corjamon is, I think, pretty decent. Jamming and being able to ping pong with Corjamon that has raid, and kind of going into the Wingdra, then Groundra, and then using your sort of top end level 6s to go into the Examon Ace, which is sort of keyword central here, right? With raid, piercing, blocker, evade, and being able to return stuff to bottom deck, suspend, unsuspend. It just does everything you could ask for in a card. I think despite it being like manifested with all the keywords, I do think it's actually not like super overpowered. I mean, I might eat my words in a couple weeks when RB eventually decides to demolish us with Examon day in and day out. But at the same time, I do think it's like one of those cards that can do crazy things, but like within reason. The new Hina, or no, this is the old Hina actually. So if your opponent has a Digimon in play, gain a memory. When one of your Digimon evolves into a Digimon with Earth Dragon, Machine Dragon, Sky Dragon, Rock Dragon, which again kind of encompasses your Examon pieces, you can suspend to activate one of those on-play effects, which is interesting. I think that's not bad. Davis is sort of your typical green-blue searcher. Double hits are always nice off of him. And the Mega Digimon Synthesis, I think, is going to be seeing a bit of a resurgence here with decks like Examon. I'm running this in my Alphamon build as well. We're seeing a lot of these top-end ace cards, and I think Mega Digimon Synthesis is actually really, really good. Being able to DNA Evo from hand for a cost of 4, not have to worry about slamming something down, having end of turn DNA, being able to just say, look, we're going to do it right now is really good, especially for a cost of 4, considering how crazy these top end ace cards are. Really, really good value, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty standard Examon build. I won't go into the nuance of it because I think, again, it's essentially you just ping pong into your top end and then kind of sit there and say, deal with me. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting deck for sure, and I definitely think we're going to start to see a lot more of it moving forward. Moving on, we have got Xros Heart from Paprika over in JP. This was at a tamer battle of 13 tamers, got first place, so congrats. Very similar to the Xros Heart build that we highlighted on sort of the first episode of Deck Check with BT-20 stuff. So, you know, again, I'll keep this short. We won't go over every single card here just because all these cards are new. I'm definitely going to be doing a deck profile on Xros once we get all our pieces in and do some more testing. But essentially, I think Xros is in this interesting spot where it's evolved from where it was in like the BT-10, BT-11 era, where it was like Digicross, swing, tuck, resources, Digicross, swing, and like kind of do really low to the ground aggression. I do think you're kind of actually relying more so on evolution now compared to straight up Digicrossing. The cross that we're getting in BT-20 or 2.5 for us here in the English side of things really almost feels like you're kind of utilizing your sort of individual pieces to kind of do maybe some initial board control, initial damage, while your win con is really getting into this big Megazoid here in EX6, being able to alliance, swing for, you know, multiple checks, restand, and do it again with the utilization of the Meteor Rock Soul option or the Damashi option, which is going to be what it's called in JP. So I think a lot of the like idea of Xros now is to get your stuff underneath your tamers. Once you have all the pieces ready to go, you go into EX6 to kind of push your damage and go for game. So the idea is to maybe get like 1 or 2 checks in to start. After you get your couple checks in with your sort of initial like aggression pieces to help cycle your pieces under your tamers, the goal is to get into EX6, clear the board, swing multiple checks, and then use the option card to restand and swing again at the end of the turn for game more than often than not. So it's an interesting idea. I do worry about decks that have a lot of redirect, decks like Taomon that say you have to swing into me, otherwise you don't do anything else, because that's where I think this deck can struggle, which is why I do think cards like Xagramon can be helpful, meaning that when you on play or when Digivolve, you Digivolve 2, so that can be a way to get around some of these things. But I think the days of like really low to the ground aggression cross are actually not so much. I will be curious to see where this takes us, you know, once we get BT-21 stuff. We got a lot of new reveals from like a new Shoutmon DX, a new Shoutmon, a new Taiki, a new option card that actually I think synergizes well with older Xros. So I think it's in a very interesting spot. You know, I think there's like different ways it can go, and I'm curious to see how it shapes up here in our NA meta, because I think in the JP side of things, we've really just become like this, like, let's assemble the Megazoid and the Megazoid wins us the game sort of deck, which is interesting. You know, very, like I said, very different stark contrast to where Xros was back when it first came out. But yeah, otherwise, this is a pretty standard Xros Heart list. Another thing I'll highlight here is the use of the Sepia memory boost, right? Because a lot of your pieces are, in fact, yellow or black or both. So you do get some consistency there, and getting extra memory is always nice. So yeah, that'll do it for that list. Alrighty, so the next deck that we have here is Sakuyamon, or probably more popularly known as Taomon Loop. This was piloted by Suichi over in JP. This was done at a tamer battle, got first place, and congratulations to you. So Taomon Loop is in an interesting spot in the meta. I think when it first came out, it really took everybody by storm, and JP sort of had that like new shiny toy syndrome, right? Where almost like everybody was trying to top with this deck, and it got a good amount of showings there too. I just think in recent times it's fallen off a little bit. I'm curious as to why. I'm wondering if part of it is consistency. I'm also wondering if it's just like decks now go faster than this deck wants to be. Granted, sometimes all you need is just the Taomon Ace to scramble into Sakuya, to scramble into Ruin mode, and you can keep cycling that ability. But at the same time, I do feel like, I think people have learned how to play around it, and the fact that if it does brick, it does essentially just now function as a Sakuyamon deck, which in its own right is still very strong and can still do some crazy things. It just suffers from tempo, suffers from aggression, and also can suffer from consistency. So it does tend to feel like other decks blow right by it. So I think if you're not seeing your loop pieces, you basically are playing Sakuya, which unfortunately hasn't really left mid-tier status. Taomon Ace is still a really, really key card for this deck. Basically saying, look, on play, if it's your turn, you can use a single color card, which we'll get to in a little bit. You're essentially playing a lot of cards that help you ramp up into higher end bodies, so scrambles, the other plugins that allow you to evo. You're basically running those option spreads to help you power up into your Ruin mode, pop the Ruin mode. You're constantly negging your opponent's board 10k DP, and that's basically the idea of the deck. Sakuya X also feeds into that mantra where you're kind of doing that same thing over and over and over again. I do like the addition of the Valder arm here. I think this is pretty much an essential, just a good generic top end for any green or yellow deck. Being able to give yourself check +1 and also kind of lock your opponent out of a turn is really, really good. It almost feels like a more aggressive Venusmon to me in a way, which, I mean, in a deck that likes to be control-y, I think is great, right? I think it does synergize pretty well with it, and it gives Sakuya that extra aggression that maybe it was lacking before, right? But like I said, the options like, for example, Scramble, Physical Training, your Super Evo plugin is really, again, these two, the Yellow Scramble and the Evo plugin, allow you to kind of just turbo up into your top end. The Invalidation plugin, or the yellow plugin that we see here, basically says they can't activate when digivolving effects, which again, very, very annoying for pretty much any Digimon deck nowadays. So yeah, that is Tau Loop. All right, and moving into the last deck of today, it's everybody's favorite engine. It's Galaxy, right? And this was piloted by Beko over in JP, got first place in a Tamer battle, and again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because this engine is well known and has been well abused by the meta for far too long now. I'm a Galaxy player myself, so I mean, I will be sad to see if this engine gets hit, but when it does get hit, I won't be surprised that it would, because again, it's been abused for far too long. You run the basic core here, right? Like, this is very, very standard for most blue-based Galaxy decks. What is interesting is that they're not running the play by effect Huangkun anymore. They're choosing or opting to run the Huangkun that basically says you can't be redirected, and on play and on Evo, one Digimon can't be deleted by battle. So I think they're using this more so because nowadays there's a lot of things that kind of stunt or handicap your play by effect ability, right? Medieval Gallant being a huge one nowadays. Levia here in NA is still pretty well rampant. So I mean, that Huangkun falls prey to Levia, falls prey to Medieval Gallant. So this is just something that says, look, like, if you're going to delete me, you have to delete me via effect, right? Or DP reduction. You can't just swing into me like Medieval typically will like to do. Mirage and Hexablau, again, very typical for your top-end blue pieces, along with Gallant and Ryugu. But I will say the key addition that we see here are two cards. First being Invisimon. Invisimon, I think, is really interesting. It's definitely got me intrigued into building back the blue-based Galaxy and switching from the red-based that I'm currently piloting. The security effect is really good. You just get to play this card without paying the cost, so essentially it's like a security Digimon. But the interesting part is that it's not a battle security. It's a end of opponent's turn. If this is in security, you just play it out, which is really interesting. Like I don't think we've seen that in Digimon yet. On Play 1 Evo, you de-Digivolve 2, and then you can basically flip your opponent's top security card face up, and then you can delete something with one or fewer Digimon card or Digivolution cards. And then during your turn, when you check a face-up security card, you can place this Digimon's top stacked card, so essentially Invisimon, at the bottom of security. So essentially kind of looping it, right? So being able to either go into it, you de-Digi 2. If you're able to check security that turn, you tuck Invisimon to the bottom of security. Opponent's turn, they finish, they can't get through security, you just play Invisimon out. You go ahead and continue to remove. I think it's a really, really nice blue top end for Galaxy. The Digivolve is something that I think Blue desperately needs to kind of stay, you know, I wouldn't say stay afloat, because I know a lot of people are like Blue needs to go. But I do think Blue has a tendency to be a little bit of a glass cannon where, you know, there aren't a lot of protection effects and a lot of defensive options. A lot of it is very much like high tempo, high aggression in terms of like unsuspend and jamming. Invisimon gives you a little bit more of a defensive option, I would say, with both de-Digivolve and removal. So I do think it's an interesting top-end piece for a blue-based Galaxy deck. And obviously, we've talked about Omnimon X already at length. I'm not going to spend too much time on him. He's just a good card, and if you have a reason to run him, you just run him, right? And those reasons are if you're blue or you're red. That's really about it. Otherwise, it's you just run him, right? But I really, really do like Invisimon in these blue-based Galaxy decks, just because it gives it another, like, there's another, like, component to it, right? Otherwise, this is a pretty standard Galaxy deck. There isn't a whole lot else to it. So, you know, I think with these two key pieces, I mean, Galaxy can still do some things, right? Until we see a restriction list, this is probably a very strong list to run and a very good basis to run your Galaxy list off of. So yeah, not much else to say about that. And that will do it for this week's video. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for listening to me for the past like half hour or so. I really do appreciate you. If you're liking the content, please do hit that like and subscribe button. We would greatly appreciate it. Be on the lookout for a box break later this weekend. We finally got our product in. A lot of us should be picking up our product like today by the time this video goes live to the public. We even might live stream either some product that I was able to get or some product that the Hoffmans are allowing us to stream, because they ended up splitting a case between the two of them. So we will definitely be getting some live breaks for you guys. So be on the lookout for it. Hope you guys are enjoying it. Thank you all for the support as always. And we hope to catch you on that next video. Bye-bye.